When Eddie Howe arrived at Newcastle United, he adopted the mantra, intensity is our identity. And ever since then, Newcastle have thrived on a system built on coordinated pressing and physically outworking their opponents. This season, though, they're sitting quite deservedly 14th. They're only 2 points above the relegation zone. And in terms of the percentage of the duels they are winning, the least physically imposing team in the Premier League. So, hello everybody, I'm Adam Clery. Welcome to the Adam Clery Football Channel. And this is what's going wrong with Eddie Howe's Newcastle. And just really quick before we start, a reminder, we are up for Best Social Media at the Football Supporters Association Awards. Still no idea how that happened. And obviously, we're not going to win that, but if you think the idea of us doing a Leicester would be really funny, or you just like the channel, I don't know. The link is in the description, and I will appreciate you voting enormously. Anyway. Alright, so this is the most requested video I've had in forever. Newcastle start the season relatively brightly given the disruptive summer, but across 3 away games that they will definitely have regarded as winnable. They created a grand total of 2 clear-cut chances while giving up 7 and were second best by a distance in the game's physical duels. They were not unlucky in any of those games, and the performances were some of the most un-Eddie Howe's Newcastle United we've ever seen. I've already shown you them being bottom for ground duels in the entire division, but even in just the simple things like running, and this was tweeted by Photovision's Andy Forrester the other day, so thanks for that, they've gone from outworking their opponents in 53% of games last season down to just 27% in this, which is quite drastic. Worse still, no team in the Premier League has pressed the opposition more than Newcastle United, and yet no team in the Premier League has won the ball in the final third less than Newcastle United. That is an astonishing contrast. But whether you're looking at the numbers or just literally watching them lately, something is fundamentally wrong with the way this team is playing its football. So what we're going to show you today is what it is they are doing, how that differs from previous seasons, and why it's suddenly so ineffective. But the very first thing to keep in mind about all of this, right, is that for a little while now, I would say maybe since the start of last season, Newcastle have desperately wanted to be better in possession. They want to control games more than they used to. They want to keep that intensity, yes, but they also want to conserve their energy to be intense at the right moments. Which, don't get me wrong, is a smart decision. It's the way this team does need to evolve. But if you're doing that and your running stats are drastically down, you are the most bullied team in the league, you are the worst at winning it back high up despite trying to do that the most, and you're losing all these winnable games, I would argue, me personally, that being more controlled in possession does not work for you. Or rather, if you look across the 11, it isn't working. If you want to progress the ball out in a controlled way, then doing it without Tino Livramento's surging runs to take presses away and without Lewis Hall's ability in tight areas is considerably harder to do. And this isn't me digging out Dan Burn or Kieran Trippier, by the way. I think they're doing their best in the circumstances, but they are very different players to Hall and Livramento. And I'll show you an example here of why that matters, right? Because if you are pressing Newcastle and you want to unsettle them, you know that Kieran Trippier is not going to fly past you, beat you in a 1v1, and you know Dan Burn is not going to break your lines of pressure with either a really nice pass or just dribbling through you. So Newcastle will try and avoid giving them both the ball in really difficult moments, and thus are now entirely reliant on either Tonali or Bruno getting the ball centrally and progressing it through the middle. And as a result, we're seeing those two get robbed of the ball in the middle of the pitch a lot more than we're used to, because the opposition know that Newcastle's options are limited and are there waiting for them. Like, this is from the Brentford game, right? First off, they move it up the left-hand side, not overly quickly. It's not one long ball, but it is still pretty direct. They've dragged everybody over to this side. They work it out into the middle. And if Tino Livramento is playing in this game, you look at this still image and tell me where you think he would be stood at this exact moment. I guarantee you he's about here somewhere, not out of shot Bruno even looks over there as soon as he gets it and just, nothing. No option down that side when they got forward this quickly. And Murphy, he's had to make the run centrally because they used Voltemade to get the ball up the pitch. And likewise, there is the other side of this problem. Botman does not really want to give this to Burn under pressure because that's not the sort of player he is, so fair enough. And they move it back into the middle, which is exactly what Brentford want them to do. Again, you look at Tonali's options here, and I'd say if Livramento was on the pitch, he would be stood here. If Lewis Hall had been on the pitch, Botman would have probably given it to him in the first place, but they have no way of getting out of the press wide, so he has to play a blind pass centrally in the hope that Voltemade will just get it. Which obviously he doesn't because Brentford dive all over that, and suddenly they are 4v4 on the edge of the box. So that's one problem, obviously, but there's also the increasingly obvious issue that Nick Voltemade lacks the energy required to lead a press the way Newcastle want to press. And I've seen people saying that he's bad at it, but he's not. The numbers this season actually show he's intercepting the ball well, he's getting his foot in, he's doing everything he can, but Newcastle's off-the-ball shape makes it really hard for him. Like, it's usually this really flat 4-5-1, meaning he has to cover the entire width of the pitch left to right, and he just isn't really quick enough to do that effectively. It's why you see most teams defend in a 4-4-2, so you've got two players to cover all of this space, but if you've only got one, you need someone who is absolutely rapid in this position. So yeah, just to give you a small ray of hope here, I do think things immediately improve a bit when you start getting Lewis Hall back in, when you got Livramento back in, maybe if you get Wisser in to make the pressing a little bit better. However, all of these problems, and Anthony Gordon's drop in form, and Anthony Elanga struggling to get going, and Joe Linton's really noticeable drop off, all of these are symptoms of the actual problem, not the actual problem. And that problem, when you look at this team and the way it plays, takes me right back to the thing I said at the very start of the video, right? It's all about the intensity of the way they play. It's simultaneously become this team's biggest strength and also its greatest weakness. At its best, you remember exactly how it looked over the last few seasons. They would hound teams in their own half, bully them off the ball, force turnovers at the top of the pitch, and make it a nightmare to try and play through them. And it made them, quite deservedly in my opinion, seen as like not the best team in the Premier League, God, nowhere near, but probably the hardest to actually play against. But as a result of the harsh lessons they learned 2 years ago, as a result of trying to play this way 3 times a week rather than just one, Eddie Howe has set out to make them better in possession too, make them more able to control games. Like, they're still at their best when they do play this way. Like, for over an hour they blew away Liverpool in the Carabao Cup final. Arsenal had no idea what had hit them in the semis, and you even saw it early on in that Barcelona game. But the reality is, you can't just keep doing the same thing every game. And even if you could, you can't do this every game when you're a small squad playing in 4 competitions. So what Eddie Howe wants is to be more controlled in the games where they are the better team, but still have that explosiveness in the tank ready for the moments or just the games where you really need it. So that then begs the question, why, given they're trying to pick their moments, are they bottom of the league for contesting duels and visibly unable to dominate games when you watch them now? And it's the exact same reason why they keep getting this accusation of taking the lead and just sitting back or taking their foot off the pedal. And that is because, physically speaking, the rest of the Premier League has caught up with Newcastle. The entire sport over the last few seasons has been trending in a taller, stronger, faster direction. Teams want to press, they want to transition from front to back, they want to contest set pieces in both boxes. And to do this effectively, you need players of a different physical profile than you did even just a couple of years ago. So in this short space of time, the Premier League has become more intense and more robust. Which is like why those European games seem so much easier for them. Like, those physical levels are distinctly lower, even when you're playing against a team who can still match you technically. Like, not to use the L word here, but Liverpool are having a massive issue with Florian Wirtz this season, and it largely stems from him struggling with the physical step up into the league. He is constantly expecting contact when he's on the ball, so he's releasing passes far too early because he just doesn't trust himself to hang on to the ball. And that would obviously still have been an issue like 3 seasons ago, but not to this extent. Now, what I want you to do here, right, is look at this starting 11 for Newcastle United. Now, I would argue that this is the most physically intense team, either in terms of like strength or just running power, right, that they could have fielded at the start of the season 2 years ago. But then you go from that, right, to this, which is their most used 11 this season. And I don't think that team is more physical than the team from 2 years ago. In fact, probably it's less, while the league is definitely more. When they need to come out and be physical, they're finding that most teams now can quite easily match them for that. Thus, when they go a goal up and the opposition raise their levels to try and get back into it, they tend not to have an answer. Like, they're not sitting back, they're getting pushed back. They've already dropped more points from winning positions than any other team in the league this season, and more than they did in the entirety of the last one. But the way Newcastle used to win games was they would score a goal, and then when the opposition came at them, they would up their levels and then go and get another one or 3. Like, this is all the games they won last season, all 20 of them, right? Look at all the 1-0s. There's one against Southampton when they were down to 10 men, so obviously. There's one against Arsenal, which, again, obviously. And then the solitary, actually grind out a result is away to West Ham. That's it. And I mentioned them earlier, but the cup final and both the semis, Newcastle take on 2 of the best teams in the country. They take the lead and then they assert themselves physically to go and get a second goal. But this season they take the lead against Arsenal and they wilted, because that Arsenal side now has Gyökeres and Zubamendi and Calafiori and Jurriën Timber, and not, as they played last season, Havertz and Jorginho and Miles Lewis-Skelly. And those are the sort of changes that the rest of the division has made as well. And just to bring this all into one point, right, this inability to be physically dominant means it's now absolutely vital for them to be better in possession and able to control games. But if you rank all the league games this season by the amount of the ball they've had, they've only won 1 of their 5 highest possession games, which means just not a great possession team. Like, the Hall and Livramento injuries, yes, they play a part in that. They've only started, I think, 1 game together all season, and that was the game where we rested Bruno. So we've literally never seen a full-strength Newcastle this season, and when we come back, things will be better, but I don't necessarily know if they'll be fixed. So naturally, you've got people asking, well, what does Eddie Howe need to do to fix this? And he knows exactly what he's got to do, because he's been trying to do it for the last 18 months. He's got to make them better in possession and less reliant on that intensity. But it's proving to be very difficult for him. It's not really working. So the question then follows, is his position under threat? And I would say it depends. How much do you realistically expect a manager to do with a starting 11 that has not been drastically upgraded in 3 seasons? Like, the only major change to Newcastle United starting 11, right, has been Voltemade for Isak. And that was not some clever bit of strategy from the board, that was thrust upon them. Like, I think Newcastle have bought really well over the last few years, but all the players are basically floor raisers. They're players who ensure that if you do have a massive injury crisis like you did 2 years ago, the overall standard of the team shouldn't drop that much. But never mind the floor, right? Who was the last player they signed to immediately raise the ceiling? Who represented an immediate increase to the on-pitch quality of this team? Tonali, probably, in 2023. If you stand still for this long in football, you do just go backwards. And if you look at the league table, that is what we are seeing right now. Now, if you're looking for a personal take on all this, I do think that Eddie Howe will turn this around. Not quite as drastically as he did 2 years ago, where dropping out of Europe saw them go from 11th pretty much back into the European places because, well, first off, they're going to be in Europe for longer, but mostly because they're just not quite as impactful a team. But mostly, I do just think that Hall and Livramento coming back in will really help with the possession, so you can be better at picking when intensity is your identity, and that will really help. And can I just say really quickly, right, Eddie Howe, in all competitions, has won 6 of his last 10 games, and they are flying in Europe. They're almost certainly going to be in another Carabao Cup semi-final.
Am I a joke to you?
So I watched those 3 away games. You're right, they were absolutely minging. So I understand everybody's concern, but I think let's keep the questions where they need to be, which is what the hell is going wrong here, and not in the insane place, which is should we fire him out of a cannon into the sun? But hey, that's just my opinion, isn't it? I would dearly like to know yours, so please do let us know what you think's going wrong and should they stick with Eddie Howe in the comments down below. I do genuinely quite enjoy sitting there and reading them all because I've got very little else to do with this life. Anyway, subscribe to us here at the ACFC Adam Clery Football Channel. That's what it's called if you haven't already, and you can get me across all the social medias at Adam Clery, Clery. And little reminder, we are voting closes on Friday. I think we are up for Best Social Media at the Football Supporters Awards. I still don't know how that happened. Nobody has told me, but if you've enjoyed this or any other video or just like filling in forms, you can vote for us at the link in the description. That's it. That's it. I think they'll be fine. I think he will turn this round to an extent, but I do think, yeah, I agree with Jamie Carragher. The board's let him down, or however he sounds. Yeah, bye.